Emma and the Mysterious Painting. It was a grey, overcast afternoon when Emma, a struggling artist, wandered into an estate sale. Among the dusty antiques and forgotten trinkets, her eyes fell on a peculiar painting. The frame was ornate and golden, but the image was unsettling in its simplicity. An empty, dimly lit room with a single chair at its centre. Something about it felt alive, almost as if it were waiting. Against her better judgment, Emma bought the painting, hoping it might spark inspiration for her next project. Back at her small studio apartment, Emma hung the painting on the wall opposite her workspace. At first, she barely noticed it, consumed by her own work. But the next morning, as she sipped her coffee, she glanced at the painting and froze. A figure now sat in the chair, a woman in a plain dress, her face obscured by shadow. Emma's stomach churned. She was certain the chair had been empty before. She dismissed it as her imagination, perhaps a detail she'd overlooked in her initial examination. The following day, Emma awoke to find the painting had changed again. The woman was gone, replaced by a man standing in the corner, his back turned toward the viewer. The dim light in the painting now cast long, eerie shadows across the room. Emma felt a growing unease, as though the painting was trying to tell her something. She began to feel watched, even when she wasn't looking at the painting. That evening, curiosity got the better of her. She scoured the internet, searching for any information about the painting, but found nothing. It was as if it had never existed before she found it. As the hours ticked by, Emma found herself glancing over her shoulder repeatedly. The air in her apartment grew heavy, oppressive. The faint creak of the chair in the painting seemed to echo in her ears, though she told herself it was just her mind playing tricks. The next morning, Emma was greeted by a new horror. The man in the painting was gone, but in his place was a small child sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring directly at her. Its eyes seemed to follow her as she moved around the room. Emma's hands trembled as she realized the child's face bore an uncanny resemblance to her neighbor's missing daughter, a disappearance that had been on the news just days before. Panic gripped her. She covered the painting with a sheet, but the suffocating feeling of being watched only grew stronger. That night she woke to the sound of soft, rhythmic tapping. Her breath hitched as she realized it was coming from the painting. She threw off the sheet and gasped. The child was gone. Instead, the painting now depicted her own apartment, every detail exact, down to the mug on her desk. In the painting, she could see herself standing frozen in terror. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her trance. It was a text from an unknown number. The message read, "Look again." With trembling hands, she turned back to the painting. The version of herself in the artwork was no longer standing still. It was looking directly at her, its eyes filled with fear. Emma stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. Suddenly, the dim light in her apartment flickered. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and move. The painted version of her now had its hands pressed against the canvas, as if trying to break free. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. Emma's heart raced as she scrambled to grab the painting and throw it out, but her hands froze the moment she touched the frame. Her reflection in the painting smirked. Before she could scream, she felt herself being pulled, her vision blurring as the world around her spun. The apartment grew darker, colder. She blinked, and when her eyes adjusted, she was no longer in her room. She was in the painting, sitting on the chair, unable to move. The last thing Emma saw before darkness claimed her was her reflection stepping out of the canvas and into her world, humming softly as it turned to cover the painting with the sheet. The next morning, the painting hung innocently in an estate sale once more, waiting for its next victim.